I don't, oh, he said he turned it off during lunch.
Oh,
and
okay, gotcha.
Brought it back on.
Lowercase l.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Any housekeeping before we start off? Actually, I have one. The bench data request, before I forget, any objections to admitting it as a bench, a bench exhibit one? All right, thank you.
I think we have one tiny minor housekeeping. We do
Sure.
have confidential testimony is in a sealed envelope, which we would also, obviously, I don't know if we want to mark that as a separate exhibit number.
Typically, we just do it as, I guess it would be like Mr. Hazempa, it'd be like, his would be 15C.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that now?
Okay.
And you already officially filed copies of that,
Oh, yeah.
correct? Yeah, I don't, Doug, do you need copies of that?
Not if it's confidential.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah, so,
I like it.
why, we can just go through and tell me, just for the record, whose is what?
Yeah. So we can say these on
Yeah, yeah.
direct testimony. So the confidential exhibits, Your Honor, are for the direct testimony of Miss Grube would be 1B.
All right, okay. She said Grube, Grube. So she just had confidential exhibits?
Yes.
Okay, all right, we'll mark those as 8C.
8C, and then for 8D would be another confidential exhibit for Miss Grube.
Okay,
And then a confidential exhibit to Mr. Bozempa's direct testimony.
can we just mark those exhibits collectively as 8C?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's confidential exhibits
Yeah,
to
yeah, we'll
direct
just make,
testimony.
yeah, Ms. Grube's confidential exhibits and her direct will be 8C. And I'm sorry, you said Mr. Hazempa?
And then a confidential exhibit to Mr. Hazempa's testimony.
All right, that will be 15C.
15C. And then
And then for Mr. Hazempa's rebuttal testimony, again, an exhibit is confidential, so that would be 17C,
Yes, ma'am, 17C.
and that's it.
That's it, all right. Any objections to admitting 8C, 15C, and 17C?
No objection.
No objection.
Okay, all right, thank you, they're admitted. All right, anything else? Mr. Tolson?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. I would at this time like to identify PPRP Exhibits 1 through 12 that have all been previously filed, I hope. PPRP Exhibits 1 through 7 were filed on September 21st, 2022. PPRP Exhibit 1 is the state's secretarial letter containing the recommendation in this case. PPRP Exhibit 2 is the direct testimony of Jenny Rogers of PPRP. PPRP Exhibit 3 is PPRP's recommended license conditions. PPRP Exhibit 4 is PPRP's project assessment report, the public version, and it has 3 appendices. Appendix A, which is responses to selected PPRP data requests. Appendix B, which is the environmental impact matrix. And Appendix C, which is emission calculations. PPRP Exhibit 5 is confidential, and that is the confidential version of the project assessment report, and it includes only one appendix, and that is Appendix A, which is confidential responses to selected PPRP data requests. PPRP Exhibit 6
Bless you.
is the confidential direct testimony of PPRP witness Ricardo Austria, and PPRP Exhibit 7 is the public direct testimony of PPRP witness Ricardo Austria. Now, PPRP Exhibits 8 through 12 were filed on December 12th, 2022. PPRP Exhibit 8 is the surrebuttal testimony of Jenny Rogers of PPRP. PPRP Exhibit 9 is PPRP's revised recommended license conditions in red line format showing the changes. PPRP Exhibit 10 is PPRP's revised recommended license conditions in clean format. PPRP Exhibit 11 is Ricardo Austria's confidential surrebuttal testimony. And finally, PPRP Exhibit 12 is Ricardo Austria's public surrebuttal testimony. At this time, I would like to move for admission into the record of PPRP Exhibits 1 through 12.
Any objections?
No, Your
No,
Honor.
Your Honor.
All right, 1 through 12 are admitted.
And I would like to note that we have here today with us both Jenny Rogers and Ricardo Austria. I'm under the impression that there were no questions for them. They are here available if anybody does have questions.
Oh, I just assumed everyone had questions. I don't have any
Oh.
questions for Ms. Rogers, but I have just a couple for Mr. Austria, if he's...
Okay, well, does anybody have any for Ms. Rogers?
No.
Okay.
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
Well, we can call Mr. Austria
Okay.
then to the stand
Excellent.
now.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm and independently the perjury statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your full name.
Ricardo Austria.
Spell your last name.
Austria.
Give me your business address, please.
4 Automation Lane, Albany, New York, 12205.
Thank you very much. Your witness.
Mr. Austria, you've previously filed both direct and surrebuttal testimony in this case, identified as PPRP Exhibits 6 and 7 and 11 and 12. Those have already been entered into evidence. Your Honor, do you want me to,
No, that's okay.
You don't need the
Yep, nope,
affirmation.
they're in, so,
in that case, I'll tender the witness.
all right, and no questions from anyone?
Your Honor, Potomac Edison has a few.
Oh, okay,
questions.
great, I'm sorry, didn't mean to skip you.
Oh, absolutely. Good afternoon, Mr. Austria. Good afternoon. Would you like a copy of your testimony to refer to?
Yes, please.
During
Let me
this.
bring it up.
I have a copy of the confidential version. Do you
I have both. Are you talking about direct or surrebuttal or both?
his direct testimony. I have confidential. Maybe we should do public.
Yes. I mean,
Thank you very much.
No, that's the confidential
This is the
version.
confidential.
Oh, you want the public?
I figured.
I mean,
so
does
we
it-
don't-
well, do we want to go into, yeah, we don't want to go into confidential side, and I don't think the questions are,
No, I think the
No,
judge said
really.
we would do that afterwards if
Yeah.
needed. but-
And they don't pertain to
Right,
confidential.
yeah, I mean, he can look at the confidential version
Your
without...
Honor, permission to approach?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And Mr. Austria, can I direct your attention to what I believe would be pages 9 of your direct testimony discussing right sizing? Be under other considerations.
Page 9 is not about.
I
Would it
think
be
that's page 10.
page 10 then?
Okay.
Thank you. And this discussion is based off of FERC's notice of proposed rulemaking, docket number RM 2119000, building for the future through electric regional transmission planning and cost allocation and generator interconnection. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was issued.
Can you speak up a little bit closer to the microphone? I'm not really picking you up.
Yes, that's correct.
And that was issued on April 1st, 2022.
Yes, it was.
Looks like it was 21st.
April 21st,
April 20.
2022.
Footnote 17.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This is a proposed rule to establish procedures to promote that projects are the most efficient and cost-effective to address regional transmission needs. Is that correct?
Yes, that's one of the components of this proposed rule.
But with this proposed rule, there's not procedures that have been made yet, or regulations?
No, this is just the proposal to develop the procedures.
So no final rule or anything?
As I understand it, the final rule has not been made yet.
And you are aware that the Doubs-Goose Creek line is 18.3 miles long, is that right?
Yes, I am
And-
aware.
And that line runs from the Dobbs substation in Maryland to the Goose Creek substation in Virginia.
Yes, the whole line goes from Dobbs to Goose Creek, yes.
Goose Creek, and you're aware that the Goose Creek station is in Virginia?
Yes,
And that Potomac Edison owns 15.2 miles of that line as it runs in Maryland. Are you aware of that, sir?
yes, I'm aware.
And that the Dominion owns the remaining 3.1 miles of that line in Virginia.
Yes, I'm aware.
Are you aware that the Virginia State Corporation Commission has approved Dominion's application to rebuild its portion of the line
Yes, I heard it in the earlier testimony today.
earlier today? And that the approved rebuild, as testified earlier today, is of a 500 kV line. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Would you agree with me then that Dominion's portion being rebuilt at 500 kV impacts those considerations of right-sizing the remaining portion that runs through Maryland?
No, not really. They're not the same thing.
If the Virginia portion of the lines were built differently or right-sized, as discussed, would modifications be required to connect the two?
No, right sizing in the context of the NOPR is talking about planning ahead to design the transmission line so it takes into account all considerations, including the state considerations, long-term issues, not just a supplemental project, for example. This is my understanding of the NOPR's objectives. Of course, this is still under discussion, but that's my interpretation.
One moment, Your Honor.
Sure, take your time.
Mr. Austria, if through right sizing the Maryland portion of the line differed from the Virginia portion of the line, what would be required to connect the two?
So, okay, in the context of the NOPR talks about developing procedures for developing plans. So the assumption here is you are planning for a project that's in the future. And you're planning it so that you can anticipate the use of this line. So it's not underutilized. It's also not oversized for its purposes, taking into account what the state objectives are, what the regional objectives are, and the utilization of the line. So if at this point we wanted to plan this whole line from Dobbs to Goose Creek, then we'll put together a whole study to do that, to right size it. all right, regardless of what has been approved or what has not been approved. This is the idea of what the NOPR is saying. To right-size a project, you plan ahead for it. This is not related to what you mentioned was the portion of the Virginia portion of the project being approved. That's not the objective of the NOPR.
So then, would it be right then to ask if, in order to achieve the right sizing that you've testified to, we would need to nullify what Dominion has already done and consider that portion that's been approved in a full rebuild down the road again? Is that appropriate or accurate?
No, this is not to nullify what's already been approved. Again, these are separate matters. The NOPR is saying if you want to build a line, to right size a line that's being replaced, then you do a planning process first, a proper planning process. That's what the NOPR is saying. It's not saying anything about what you've already approved. It's talking about how do you identify the right project to solve a certain set of problems.
And so, given that it's the proposed rulemaking, does that planning process that you're talking about then, does that apply to this project?
Yes, it does. I mean, if you're going to justify a project, and as my testimony has already indicated, this is a consideration for the commission, that if you want to take into account the NOPR from FERC, whose objective is to do proper right-sizing planning for studies, then this is how you would approach it. And that's what I'm pointing out in my testimony.
Okay, so it'd be a further commission or a further consideration for the commission, but there wouldn't be guiding regulations or rules for the commission to apply that then, right?
I don't know whether that would guide anything in the future. I'm referring to what the FERC objective is to how do you approach this kind of project where you want to replace an existing line, and how do you right size it? Okay, so this is just the approach. How you implement it is beyond my understanding of what's in the NOPR yet.
Do you have any indication as to when FERC intends to finalize its rule?
No, I don't. It's still in discussion at this point.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. San Martino?
Thank you, Your Honor. I just have one brief question for this witness. Mr. Austria, in the discussion of the FERC NOPR that just occurred, you indicate that FERC's aim through the NOPR is to establish a proper planning process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's one part of the NOPR.
And would you agree that part of the NOPR's aim is to ensure that there's a more robust analysis of alternatives to proposed transmission projects proposed in a given RTO?
Again, since the NOPR is still under discussion, that may be one of its components, but the desire is to develop the right approach for doing these kinds of projects.
And in your opinion, the right approach would be to require a little bit more from utilities and state public service commissions in ensuring that the alternatives to alternative solutions to an identified need are robustly discussed and assessed before a final project is decided.
Yeah, my just to put it in my own words is that what I was trying to say is the participation of the state agencies, the interregional agencies, and a long-term planning process be implemented. That's what I understand the NOPR is trying to say here. The process for doing that has not been defined yet at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Austria. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Dean?
Staff has no questions for this witness. Thank you.
Mr. Tolson?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right. All right. I have a couple questions on the same line. Okay, so is your recommendation that the commission pause kind of what we're doing here today, don't move forward in approving or denying this project, and then conduct further proceedings? Or you recommend approving it and then doing like a phase 2, or?
Yeah, my recommendation is that the project be approved because of the reliability need for it. Now, the FERC NOPR is an indication that there might be some changes in the future that the commission wants to take account, especially the participation of the state in the planning process. And whether it applies to this project or not, I don't know, but to put this in front of the commission so the commission knows that this is going on industry-wide, and this is something for Maryland to take into consideration.
Okay, so assuming, let's assume, we go with that, and kind of what council was talking to you about, like how would the commission measure whether what the company has proposed is the right size? Is it, the criteria, or what would you base it on?
So, on my professional opinion, so if this project was approached with the right sizing idea that the NOPR seems to indicate, then there would have been a planning process involving the state, the regional entities like PJM, and the utilities to develop the right base cases and models for the future, to represent the future conditions and scenarios, and study all the alternatives that can solve the issue of the unreliability of the line, right?
Right, so that would have occurred in theory before this proceeding, correct?
Yes, also it would have informed this proceeding.
Sure. Okay, but given where we are now, where does the commission go from here in terms of the NOPR?
You're asking me for a recommendation or my
Well,
opinion?
what I just heard you say is, the planning process would have taken place before Potomac Edison files their application, before there's testimony filed, before we have a hearing today. So the NOPR planning process would have been completed already. And in theory, that Potomac Edison would have selected a project that's right-sized. But given where we are today, and I believe you indicated that you're recommending approval of the project, how does the commission incorporate aspects of the NOPR that you're
Right.
discussing into this case?
So, based on the information that was provided by the company in this case, the only planning study that was presented talked about what happens if you turn off the line or retire it. So, conceptually, if we follow what the NOPR is saying, the planning process and the justification for the project would have involved a planning study already, and in this case, since we're already advanced in this process, maybe it doesn't impact this project, but to initiate that process, this would be a best place to do it. Now we have an example or a case that we can look at. How would we approach it if we follow the NOPR's recommendations, for example? You have to start somewhere.
No, I get it. So you're still recommending approval and then have like another planning phase before Potomac Edison puts a shovel in the ground? Is that kind of what you're talking about? I'm just trying to understand.
I'm not trying to stop the project. So
No. I'm just trying to see like how your recommendation would be implemented.
yeah. So what lessons do we learn from the process?
Right.
We learned that we needed to have a study, and the studies were supplied by the company, although the studies were just a test of what happens if you retire the line. But we needed studies to see what would be the, like the talking about the non-wires alternative? What is the benefit to the state? Will it be able to use generation, or will it be able to benefit from the line? Those should have been done at some point.
Right, so maybe it wouldn't, the NOPR wouldn't apply to this case, but maybe in future cases. Is that kind of what you're
Yeah.
implying? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
That's all I was trying to say.
Okay, great. All right. So I completely get it now. All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Tolson, do you have any follow-up based on mine?
No, Your Honor, I was just going to simply note that on page 11 of his testimony, at lines 3 through 13, he basically says what he just said now, that going forward, the commission may want to take these considerations into effect. And we agree that the NOPR is not yet, it's a proposed rule, it's not a final rule, so who knows what it'll say when it finally, if it's done.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out. I just wanted to make sure, I think that point was clear. Any follow-up?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Mr. San Martino?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Dean? Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
May Mr. Austria be released? He's traveled from out of state.
Sure. Any reason why we can't? No? Safe travel, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. To me.
I'll make your life
And Your Honor, one administrative point, I
Yes,
do
sir.
have a complete copy of both public and confidential exhibits here because of some problems we experienced with the filing. So if the court reporter, Mr. Chambers, would like to retrieve those. I think these got out of order, but you'll be able to figure it out. The whole thing. They're rubber banded, public and confidential.
Now, okay.
We have nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay. Do you need that, Doug? You don't need them. Okay. All right. That's fine. All right. Mr. San Martino?
Thank you, Your Honor. OPC has one witness. Mr. Baidwan?
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm under the penalties of perjury the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your full name.
Sandeep Badwan.
Spell your last name.
P-A-I-D-W-A-N.
Give me your business address.
75 Main Street, Suite 106, Melbourne, New Jersey, 07041.
Thank you very much. You may proceed.
Thank you. Your Honor, as a preliminary matter, the pre-filed testimony of Mr. Baidwan, there's a public version and a confidential version, and the only difference between the two is the confidential version contains 2 DRs that I believe are part of a marked a set of DRs that was marked confidential. Would you like me to admit or have the entire direct testimony marked as?
No, we could just do the exhibits. We'll do it
exhibits?
13 and 13C. That's
Okay.
fine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Baidwan, do you have before you a document entitled "The Direct Testimony of Mr. Sandeep Baidwan"?
Yes, I do.
And this was filed in this case on September 21st, 2022, and assigned mail log number 242407.
Yes.
And does that document include 43 pages of testimony and 2 appendices, including DR responses from Potomac Edison, PPRP, and staff?
Yes.
And do you also have before you a confidential version of the same testimony? And this includes 2 additional DR responses compared to your public testimony?
I believe so, I do.
Your Honor, I would like to have Mr. Baidwan's pre-filed direct testimony marked for identification as OPC Exhibit 13.
It'll be so marked.
And the 2 confidential DRs, I believe those are Potomac Edison's response to staff DR 3-3 and Potomac Edison's response to staff DR 3-4.
All right, we'll mark that as 13C.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Baidwan, do you also have before you a document entitled the surrebuttal testimony of Sandeep Baidwan, which was filed in this case on December 14th, 2022, and assigned mail log number 300509?
Yes, I do.
And does that document include 14 pages of narrative testimony?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would like to have Mr. Baidwan's pre-filed surrebuttal testimony marked for identification as OPC Exhibit 14.
It'll be so marked.
Mr. Baidwan, were all these documents, with excluding the DR responses that are attached, prepared, all these documents before you prepared by you or under your supervision and direction?
Yes.
Do you have any corrections or deletions to make to your respective testimonies at this time?
No, I don't.
If you were asked the same questions today under oath as reposed in your pre-filed testimonies, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
For these reasons, do you adopt these direct and surrebuttal testimonies, respectively, as your sworn testimony in this matter?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move that OPC exhibits numbers 13, 13C, and 14 be admitted into evidence.
Any objections?
No objection.
All right, 13, 13C, and 14 are admitted. And
thank
bless
you.
you, Mr. Dean.
Thank you, Your Honor, and the witness is available for cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. In addition to your direct and surrebuttal testimony, you also sponsored responses to a number of data requests directed to OPC by Potomac Edison. Is that right?
Correct.
I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to you.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Baidwan, I pre-marked this document as Applicant's Exhibit 18. Would you take a look through and make sure that it appears complete to you?
It does, yes.
And this is your, OPC's responses to Potomac Edison's data requests, and they're dated October 21st, 2022, correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, I'd like to move OPC's responses into the record,
All
please.
right. Any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. 18 is admitted.
You recall that you sponsored all but 2 of the 19 responses. Council sponsored one on its own, and then there's another one that you and council sponsored together. Is that your recollection, or do you need to?
That sounds correct, yes.
Okay. And you haven't sponsored any supplemental responses to these data requests since the original responses were submitted back in October?
I do not believe so.
And you're not aware of any other witness or counsel for OPC sponsoring supplemental responses to these data requests since that date?
I'm not, no.
Turning to your responses to the applicant's data requests, do you recall that there were 2 responses where you were unable to provide details as to your relevant experience because of confidentiality reasons?
Correct.
Specifically, your response to PEDR 1-2 notes that you served as a technical director to plan transmission network expansion for a transmission owner in the PJM footprint, correct?
Correct.
And at the time you responded to that data request, you could not disclose the name of the transmission owner due to confidentiality reasons, right?
Correct.
Is that still the case?
That is still the case, yes.
Are you able to at least state the number of transmission expansion projects you supported for that transmission owner?
I've been supporting work for them for 2 years. I can't recollect the exact number, but I would say between 10 and 15.
And do you know how many of those have been built?
Number of them are under construction at this point of time. They are also in planning and permitting stages. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how many have been built, but they have been approved. They're moving towards construction.
So it's possible that none have been built, but they're under construction. I mean,
They're
they're
under
completely built, but they are being built.
Correct.
Okay. Similarly, in response to PE DR 1-3, which requested that OPC identify all the projects in PJM involving renewable technologies and conventional generation in PJM on which you, Mr. Bodwin, worked, state when and where each project was to be built, state whether in fact it was built, and explain your role with respect to each project. You noted again that non-disclosure agreements precluded you from disclosing certain projects, correct?
Correct.
And those non-disclosure agreements are still in effect today?
That is correct, yes.
Are you able, with respect to those projects, to state the number of projects?
There are tens of them, Council. We don't track them that actively. We don't track the number of them that actively, but I would say north of 20.
And is that number inclusive of the projects that were relate to DR 1-2, or is this a separate set of projects?
No, those are separate. So this is specifically talking about renewable technologies.
Yep.
The other one is more on transmission expansion. So two different things.
Okay. And again, you'd be guesstimating in terms of how many have been built, or do you know?
I would say maybe 10% of them have been already built, but a number of them are in planning stages, permitting stages. The ones which I refer here have received many of their permits. They have power purchase agreements in place, so they have all likelihood of moving to construction.
Generally speaking, what was your role on those projects?
I have a team that works for me, so I acted as their supervisor. I also provided technical direction to a lot of these studies. A lot of this work, in fact, all of this work happened under my supervision.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Leone, just out of curiosity, is it standard to have non-disclosure agreements that you can't say who you did work for?
Yes, Judge.
Really?
Yes. There are a lot, especially on the power generation side, a lot of that work is highly, it's very competitive in nature. A lot of our clients do like to keep their consulting firms confidential and not disclose them. It's a way of them ensuring that they have resources which are fully dedicated to them, and their competition is not aware of certain things.
All right, thank
So,
you.
to be clear, none of these projects would be in a situation like this where there would be a public record where it would be, acknowledged who the consultants were and that they were filing testimony and providing consulting services.
Well, I think there may be a chance where projects go to permitting and I'm called upon to testify as I'm doing here, and in that case we would negotiate with our clients and try to get out of a confidentiality agreement if that is required.
But as of now, none of the projects that are in the permitting phase have required you to actually provide any testimony.
Correct.
Thank you. If we could take a look at your SIR rebuttal testimony, which I believe just was marked as OPC 14. And you were here earlier today, weren't you, when Mr. Souter was being questioned?
Yes, I was here.
Okay. So in your SIR rebuttal testimony, you discussed a similar topic, the baseline RTEP projects and supplemental projects, and you stated that because this is a supplemental project, it was not subject to the rigorous analytical planning processes required of regional and sub-regional baseline RTEP projects, correct?
Correct.
You understand that this is a single line that happens to cross from one state to another, right?
Yes, I do.
And the Virginia portion of this line did go through the competitive process.
That is correct, yes.
And were you aware before Mr. Souter's testimony today that only one project was identified via that competitive process?
I was not aware. I was aware that the project proposed by Dominion was selected or selected by PJM to move forward. I wasn't aware how many projects were proposed in that window.
And the project that Dominion identified was the in-kind replacement,
Correct. Yes.
And is the project that is going to be taking place with respect to the Virginia portion of the line.
That is correct. Yes.
And then as we heard, that project's already been approved by the Virginia State Corporation Commission, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And here in Maryland, we've got a similar proposal, in-kind replacement, right?
Yes.
Your rebuttal testimony did not mention that supplemental projects like the project proposed in Maryland are governed by the process described by Mr. Souter, which is the PJM Open Access Transmission Tariff at attachment M3. Do I have that right? I didn't see it in here, but
Could you rephrase that, Counsel?
your rebuttal testimony didn't mention that supplemental projects like the proposed project here in Maryland are governed by the attachment M3 process.
It may not have.
But you did review Mr. Souter's rebuttal testimony on that topic, correct?
I did. Yes.
And you're aware, based on that testimony, that supplemental projects are presented through PJM's Transmission Expansion Advisory Committee for review and comment, correct?
Correct.
And that's a three-part meeting process. I think we saw a data request, it may be in front of you there, that discussed the parts to that meeting. And as I understand it, there's 3 meetings. There's an assumptions meeting to review criteria, assumptions, not surprisingly, and models that a transmission owner proposes to use to develop its supplemental projects, correct?
Correct.
And then there's a needs meeting that reviews the identified system needs based on that criteria, assumptions, and models that were vetted during the first meeting, the assumptions meeting, right?
Correct.
And then there's finally a solutions meeting, and that's to review potential solutions developed to address previously identified system needs, right?
Correct.
So, Mr. Souter testified to all that. He also testified about PJM's do no harm analysis of supplemental projects. You heard that. And in fact, OPC propounded a data request on that very topic, which is what was marked earlier. I believe it's OPC 3. It may be in front of you if you could take a look.
OPC 3.
Who knows what's up there right now? It's looking a little scattered.
Could you give me a copy if you have one?
Yes,
Looks
yeah,
like it's
we have
OPC response to 4, or PE response to 4-3, is that correct?
Yes, it's,
Okay.
yeah, okay. Yeah, it's OPC 4-3 is the data request number, and it's.
Thank you.
The exhibit number is OPC 3, which may be why we have a little bit of confusion here. And let me know, take a look and then let me know when you're ready.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you have a chance to review that before today, or is this the first time you're seeing it?
No, I've read this before.
Okay. In that response, Mr. Souter confirmed several things. One, that PJM did conduct a do no harm study of the Doubs-Goose Creek rebuild project, which included updated electrical parameters and new ratings for line 14 provided by Dominion. Do you see that?
I do.
And he went on to state that the purpose of a do no harm study is to evaluate whether the proposed solution will adversely impact the reliability of the PJM transmission system as represented in the planning models used in all other PJM reliability planning studies. Do you see that?
Yes.
Mr. Souter also confirmed in that response that PJM then compared the results of its analysis with the existing line and determined that there were no adverse reliability impacts associated with the Doubs-Goose rebuild project. Correct?
Correct?
And then finally, he explained that in October, PGM conducted N1 and N11 studies that were separate from its do no harm analysis. Correct?
Correct.
And so, if we aggregate all of that, this project was subject both to the attachment M3 process for supplemental projects, including the do no harm study, and further reliability analyses beyond what's required for a supplemental project, correct?
I would say yes, the N-1 and N-1 analysis was beyond what PGM typically does for supplemental projects.
And per your testimony, you don't disagree with Mr. Souter's testimony regarding the reliability issues identified by those N1 and N11 studies, do you?
Based on what PGM provided, yes, I do not disagree.
Okay. And then, also in your sir rebuttal testimony regarding the testimony provided by Mr. Hozempa, you commented on his disagreement with your conclusions concerning the need for the line based on the impact to the reliability of the transmission system if the line were to be retired, correct?
Correct.
Isn't it true that by the date that Mr. Hozempa had filed that rebuttal testimony, which was in October, I believe it was October 26, 2022, both Potomac Edison and PJM had conducted those additional analyses confirming the need for the line?
I can't recall the exact sequence of dates, but if you're saying that's how it was, maybe that's how it went.
Well, isn't it true that you agree that the company has provided information sufficient to demonstrate the reliability need posed by the retirement of this line?
Yes, that's in my sure rebuttal testimony too.
Okay. And with regard to the need for the line, your only issue per your sir rebuttal testimony is that Potomac Edison did not take into consideration the original need for the line.
That's one of the
Objection. I believe that mischaracterizes Mr. Bidwan's testimony.
I narrowed it to just the need for the line, not his whole testimony, but just the need for the line.
Overruled. I think the question was, can you restate your question?
I can
'Cause-
try again,
Thank
sure.
you.
With regard to the need for the line, your only issue per your sir rebuttal testimony is that Potomac Edison did not take into consideration the original need for the line.
That's one of the concerns I raised.
Okay. But to be clear, both Potomac Edison's and PGM's analyses confirmed the ongoing need for the line.
That is correct, yes.
Despite the fact that Potomac Edison's and PGM's analyses confirmed the ongoing need for the line, you also expressed concern that the proposed project is not, and I quote, the least cost solution to the identified reliability need, correct?
I don't think the company has provided enough information for me to know, or for anybody to know if it is the least cost solution.
Well,
It may be, but we haven't seen anything to prove that.
Well, setting aside the statutory regulatory basis for whether or not that's required, you're aware that Potomac Edison did provide information in response to data requests explaining why a non-wire solution would not be as effective as an in-kind replacement or in-kind rebuild as is proposed here. Correct?
Yes, they did provide answers to my question on that.
And in fact, Potomac Edison explained that the line provides greater operational flexibility in the form of an instantaneous response to any system disturbance without any control system delay or without requiring any operator action. Do you recall that? I actually have a
I have
copy of
seen,
that.
yeah, I remember seeing that in Mr. Hozempa's responses or in his testimony.
I mean, I have it here if you
If
prefer.
you're
being
going to ask
directed.
questions about it, it might just be
Let's-
easier to
let's-
have it in front of them.
Here, let me just keep three.
And it's PE Exhibit 15 for anyone scoring at home.
I have 19.
19? Okay.
Yep.
Oh, this is something else. I'm sorry.
Yep.
But this is attached to Mr. Hozempa's testimony? Oh, this is, okay,
No,
completely
this is
separate.
applicant's 19.
Okay, my apologies. We'll mark this as 19 for identification.
So I just want to draw your attention to the response to subpart A, where Mr. Hozemper provided that information about instantaneous response to system disturbance without delay, without requiring operator action. Are you aware of any alternative solutions that would provide instantaneous response to system disturbance without any control system delay or without requiring any operator action?
So I think there are a few things in here which may be, when you're talking about instantaneous response, yes, there are other technologies which act very fast. They may act in a few cycles, much less than a second, and on a similar time scale, if not exactly the same time scale. For example, control systems on battery storage has advanced so much that they can be switched on and off very, very quickly, very instantaneously. So yes, I would say that there are other competing technologies, some of which Mr. Hozempa also mentioned this morning, such as fax devices, SVCs, STATCOMs. All those devices are very, very fast acting.
And they act without any operator
Correct.
action?
Yes, they do.
And without any control system delay?
Well, control system is an integral part of power systems. Transmission lines have control systems. Generation plants have control systems. So, I think the way you are saying it, it alludes that transmission lines do not have control systems, which is not correct. All these pieces of equipment have control systems, and they will have some delay in them. However, as I said, technology has advanced to a point where control systems can act much, much faster. 1/5, 1/20th of a second, which is much faster.
And in relation to the non-wires alternatives that you're talking about, Potomac Edison explained that the amount of such alternatives that might be required, or the number of locations of those non-wires alternatives that would be needed to provide transfer capacity, both real and reactive power, going back to Mr. Hozempa's testimony earlier today, and that would be between the two substations on this line. That would be significant in cost,
Sure.
environmental impact, and schedule.
Correct.
All right. And you're aware that Potomac Edison also actually considered two alternative routes to the rebuilding in place,
Yes, I'm aware of that, ma'am.
and that I think it was pre-marked earlier as I think it's OPC 7. Although I think I'm going to enter this as well, if we can. Oh, actually, Your Honor, I don't believe I sought to move into evidence either applicants 18 or 19. And
let's see.
would like to do so if I
I
did
think
not.
we moved in 18, we did not move in 19.
Okay.
Any objections?
No objection.
No objection.
All right, 19's admitted.
All right, I'm going to hand this out. If you could. So, I'm marking something is pre-marked as applicants 20. It's actually two data requests together, but one refers to another. The first one is already in the record as OPC 7, so OPC 3-2 is in the record.
Okay, we'll mark this, the combination, as 20 for identification.
Yep. And in the response to subpart A, there's a reference to staff 5-4, which I have attached here, so that it's a complete response together.
Thank
So,
you, ma'am.
Sure. And Mr. Bydwin, have you seen this data request response before?
Yes, I have, Councilman.
And both of them, I should say, both OPC 3-2 and staff 5-4.
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
And per the response to staff 5-4, well, that's actually Ms. Grube testified that, and this is at the very end of page 2 and going on to page 3, so that you don't need to review all aspects of the alternatives considered, that route selection was based on overall environmental suitability and feasibility. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I'd like to move applicants 20 to the record as well.
All right, any objections?
No objection.
No objection.
All right, 20's admitted.
And then just considering all of this, the non-wires alternatives, the alternative routes, what Mr. Hozempa testified to regarding the responsiveness of the proposed line. In your rebuttal testimony, you admit that it's unlikely that there is some other alternative to the proposed project that would be the least cost solution to the identified reliability need, right?
Yes, I mean, I would say that it is possible, it's more than possible, it's likely that other non-wire alternative solutions may be more expensive. But again, there's nothing to base that judgment on or know that for sure. It's just based on my professional judgment.
Thank you. That's all I have for this witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Tolson?
No questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Dean?
Staff has no questions. Thank you.
Mr. San Martino, any redirect?
Yes, just one brief question, Your
Sure.
Honor. Mr. Baidwan, is there a difference between an analysis of alternative routes and an analysis of non-wires alternatives?
Yes, there is. An alternative route is just you're doing the same project, you're connecting the same two substations, you're building a same line, same capacity, but you're following a different route. So it may be slightly longer, slightly shorter. An NWA or a non-wires alternative is a recourse to the project itself. So you would either build something which negates the need of the project altogether, or there might be a hybrid solution where you do a partial non-wires alternative, maybe a lower capacity line, which is not as expensive, not as intrusive, some combination of that. So those are two very different things.
Yeah, thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, sir, so where do you stand? I know you raised a ton, I don't want to say a ton, several issues in your direct, and then you responded in your rebuttal with a couple issues, but you at least, it seemed like you agreed on the need for the line from
Yes.
from a reliability purposes.
Yes,
Is that-
gotcha. I would
okay.
agree with that.
Okay, but overall, you're still recommending that the CPCN not be approved?
I wouldn't categorically say that. I think, I think the company could have done more analysis, could have provided more evidence, which would have definitely helped with the decision making. They could have looked at some alternatives. As I said, it's possible alternatives may not have worked, but I didn't see any evidence that gives me the comfort to say yes, that definitely will not work. So I think, I wouldn't definitely say that it should be denied. But I think all this other analysis would have helped in the decision making.
Okay. In terms of the analysis you're looking for, that likely would have happened in a baseline if this had been considered a baseline project. Is that correct? Or more of it anyway?
Well, I think looking at alternatives for a project, maybe looking at non-wires alternatives, that is, in many cases, it's done irrespective of what the classification of a project is done by PCM. Most utilities, these are public utilities. It's incumbent on them to find the lowest cost solution, but an equally effective solution, and all this is part of that.
All right. In terms of the original need, I know you indicated that Potomac Edison didn't do an analysis of what the original need, why the line was constructed. I didn't phrase that correctly, but I think you know where I'm going. Or you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
They didn't look at. Now, is that relevant given the analysis that shows there's reliability violations if the plans or if the line is retired?
Well, I think not as important, Judge. I think, I somewhat agree with Mr. Hozempa to say that, hey, it needs change over time, and it may not be as relevant to know what the original need for the project was. But I think it's, you can't make that determination unless you know what the original need was, and that's a point of what I'm saying in my testimony. So I learned this morning from Mr. Hozempa's cross-examination what the original need for the project was. It was never mentioned in the documentation he provided. but yeah, I think the more focus needs to be on what the line is doing today and what happens if it's not rebuilt or retired. And I think the company has provided evidence to that effect.
Okay. You would have just liked to have seen some alternatives
I would have liked to
in,
see,
in,
yes.
in the cost of those alternatives.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, those are, I would classify them as good planning or good industry practices in this industry.
Sure. And there was one, in your direct, you had indicated that this project was more of a modification since they were rebuilding the line. Do you recall that, sir?
I do, yes.
Okay. Now, do you think that the commission should treat this project as a new project rather than a modification?
Your Honor, I think I wouldn't call it it's a new project because the line, it does exist today. That's a fact. But I would also call it more than a modification for the reason that, it's not that you are rebuilding one structure on the line or you are stringing a new conductor or you're fixing 5 out of 30 structures. It is a rebuild of a major transmission line, a complete rebuild of a major transmission line. So I think it falls somewhere in that gray area of modification and a new build. It's not a new build. I see it as more than a modification.
Okay. And if it was treated as a new build, there'd be, I don't want to say more, I don't want to say hoops to jump through, but more requirements to tick off.
I understand.
Okay. Is that, you would agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I don't have anything further. Anybody have questions based on mine?
Your Honor, may I have a minute to confer with my
Yep.
co-counsel?
Go ahead. Oh, they left. Didn't know they were going to go outside. Yeah, yeah. Notice of proposed rulemaking. Is that right?
Yes.
NOPR. Sure. All right. Mr. San Martino.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just have one question for this witness based on your questions. Mr. Baidwan, is it your position that this line should or should not be rebuilt at this moment and pending further analysis on possible alternative solutions and their viability and cost effectiveness? in the future?
I think it definitely would have helped to look at some alternative analysis to make sure that it is the lowest cost, most effective solution. And if the line is something that can withstand or can be there for another 3-4 years, maybe as a professional, in my professional experience, I would have liked to see that analysis to make that determination.
So just to clarify, is it your position that a delay in the rebuild in order for the company to conduct some more analysis on alternative solutions, would you agree with that as being the correct course of action?
Only if the line is in a position where it can, if it can sustain, or it doesn't fall apart within the time period it is required to complete that additional analysis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baidwan. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, anyone else?
I mean, if I could follow up on that and not on anything you got asked, I'd be.
Well, I mean,
I have one.
no, I think it's fair, because it is kind of a slight nuance.
Were you present for Mr. Grant's testimony at the beginning of the hearing?
Yes, I was.
And do you recall that he mentioned in his direct testimony
Bless you.
that the line had 2 to 4 years before there might be something catastrophic happening? Do you recall that?
I remember that, yes.
And he stated that that was from the date his testimony was filed, which was August 3rd, 2021. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And so here we are in January 2023. We're basically almost a year and a half into the 2 to 4 year period, and there is additional considerations, like, for example, construction seasons, so that this is not, an instantaneous swapping out of all the structures and all of the conductor, that the project will take some time to actually implement, pending, approval, which is also not going to be instantaneous.
Sure.
So you're aware of all of that testimony that suggests that we are closing in on the midpoint of that very narrow window.
I did hear that from Mr. Grant this morning. Yes,
And that
ma'am.
if it's 2 years instead of 4, the narrow window is getting really narrow. Would
But,
you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a civil or structural engineer, so I can't say whether it's 2 years or 4 years, but I understand the risk that Mr. Grant highlighted this morning.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Mr. Dean? All right, so I'll try and capture your position in a nutshell, just so I understand it. So you agree there's a need for the line to be rebuilt, but based on the PJM analysis and the analysis that were submitted in rebuttal testimony, right?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
But you would have liked to have seen alternatives and the cost-benefit analysis for those alternatives.
Yes, Your Honor.
And if those alternatives could be done before the line falls down, that would be your position. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Anything else? Did I miss? I just want to
I
make.
don't think so.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Last. All right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good? Anybody need a break? We're ready to go? All right. Let's press on.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm and overcome these occurred with the statements made in this matter?
I do.
State your full name.
Samrawit Darare.
Spell your last name.
Dererie.
E.E. what?
Dererie.
And give me your business address, please.
6 St. Paul Street, Baltimore, Maryland 21202.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Ms. Derriere. Do you have before you a document entitled the Direct Testimony Exhibits dated September 21, 2022, consisting of 19 pages and exhibits?
I do.
And do you have this in a public and confidential version?
I do.
And was this document prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to this document?
No, I don't.
Your Honor, staff would like to mark this as staff exhibit number 1.
All right, we'll mark 1, and you want to do 1C for the confidential, sir?
Yes.
Or did you get there yet?
1 and 1C.
Okay, great.
And do you have a second document titled the Sir Rebuttal Testimony Exhibits of Samrat Derriere, dated December 14, 2022?
I do.
And you have this in confidential and public versions also?
Yes.
And was this document prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes.
Do you have any corrections or changes to this document?
I do have one minor suggestion. Not suggestion. Change.
It's your testimony.
So in light of the company's errata submitted, I have one word I want to add on line 4. So right after Pepco, I would want to add APA's.
And what page is this, ma'am?
So, I apologize.
That's
It's
okay.
page 7 of my rebuttal testimony.
All right, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep, page 7, line 4.
Mm-hmm.
So right after Pepco, I would add and APS zones. So instead of zone, it would be zones.
So it would read Pepco and APS zones.
Correct.
All right, we'll get rid of zones there. All right. Gotcha. Okay.
And with this correction, are these two documents, do they constitute your testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, they do.
Your Honor, I'd like to move into evidence staff exhibits 1, 1C, 2, and 2C,
All right, any objections?
No objections.
All right, they're admitted.
and my witness is available for cross-examination.
All right, Ms. Leone,
We have no questions for this
Mr.
witness.
Tolson,
No questions.
Mr. San Martino.
Your Honor, I do have a few questions.
No, that's fine. I was going to ask a few. She's been sitting here all day, so hopefully somebody had something for her.
Good afternoon, Mr. Riri. At page 4 in your direct testimony, beginning at line 6, you explained that a CPCN is necessary prior to commencing modification to an overhead transmission line. And then further down at line 9, you described this project as a replacement of an existing 500 kilovolt overhead transmission line.
Yes.
So am I correct in understanding that staff considers this rebuild project a modification of an existing line?
Yes. Yes. Want to make sure.
Mr. Riri, so on page 3 of your testimony, at lines 20 through 24, you explained that this rebuild project involves replacing 76 structures and the entire 500 kilovolt circuit. Is it correct that the 76 structures being replaced are all of the structures on this line?
It was my understanding. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I thought I think there were some additional structures that may not have been replaced. But I think you're correct. I think all of the structures are being replaced as part of this project.
Okay.
Yep.
And as you state on page 6, beginning at line 10, each structure will be on average 20 feet taller than the existing structures, correct?
I'm sorry, what page and what line?
Page 6 and line 10. And this is still your direct testimony.
Yes.
And is it correct that each conductor on the line is being replaced as well?
Yes, it is.
And the replacement of these conductors will nearly double the line's maximum operating capability, correct?
Correct.
So you'd agree that once this project is complete, the result will be a taller transmission line with a significantly higher line rating and brand new components. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, in your opinion, as an engineer, you'd agree that replacing only the conductors on the transmission line would be a modification, correct?
Can you restate the question?
In your opinion, would you agree that if only the conductors on a transmission line were to be replaced, you would consider that a modification? Yes?
I would have to go to the statute to see what constitute modification, but
In your professional opinion.
I would assume so, yes.
And in your professional opinion, would you agree that replacing only the structures but leaving the conductors in place would also be a modification, correct?
Can you restate the question again? I'm a little confused.
In your professional opinion, if all of the individual, well, not all, excuse me, if individual structures on a line are replaced, but the conductor bundles are left in place, and other components on the line are left in place, would you consider the replacement of those structures a modification?
Yes.
But in your professional opinion, a greenfield transmission line, so a line constructed on an entirely new ROW, right of way, and with new structures and conductors, that would be considered new construction, correct?
Correct.
So, in your professional opinion, compared to a project where only certain components on a transmission line were replaced, such as the conductors or individual structures, you'd agree that a fully rebuilt line in an existing right-of-way more closely resembles new construction rather than a modification of an existing line, correct?
I agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reary, on page 16 of your direct testimony, and beginning at line 21, you discuss how the company considered the impacts of climate change on its line. Upon reviewing your direct and rebuttal testimonies, I can't locate any discussion as to whether you agree with the company's conclusions or whether the company has sufficiently addressed those impacts. Is there any place in your testimony where you agree with the company's conclusions or state whether you believe the company has sufficiently considered climate change impacts?
I believe the company considered climate change impacts because one of the considerations is whether they accounted for, the design accounted for potential line sag associated with increased temperature. So in light of what we're interested in, I thought the company addressed our climate change issues.
And in your professional opinion, and based on your review of the testimonies and the data and the discovery in this case, do you believe that the company's application has, is there information sufficient for your review in assessing the impacts of climate change on the Doubs-Goose Creek line?
Can you please repeat the question?
Is there information, based on your review of the case record so far, and in your professional opinion, is there information, has the company provided information sufficient for you to evaluate the impacts of climate change on this line?
Yes, consistent with our standard of review, the company sufficiently addressed climate change issues in their filing.
Thank you. Ms. Deriri, did you review the supplemental direct testimony of Mr. Lawrence A. Hozempa?
Yes.
And this testimony addresses the statutory factors concerning climate change recently added to the Public Utilities article.
Can you direct me to Mr. Huzempa's testimony? Is it the direct?
This is the supplemental direct. I can provide that to you if
Okay.
that'd be helpful.
It would actually, I think it's in the binder, tabs 16. See if you can, I think that's right.
The list. Yeah, 16.
Yep.
What page?
I'm asking if you've reviewed this testimony and you're familiar with it.
I believe I reviewed it, but I don't recall the details of it at this point.
So you're aware that the Commission is now required to consider the preservation of environmental quality and achievement of Maryland's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals when it's reviewing and deciding on an application for CPCN, correct?
Correct.
Now, I don't see anywhere in your direct or surrebuttal testimonies where you discuss whether the company has sufficiently addressed those factors. Is there any place in your testimony where you state whether the company has addressed the effect that the Doubs-Goose Creek rebuild will have on the preservation of environmental quality and achievement of Maryland's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals?
I remember I've asked questions about it, but a lot of the environmental stuff or environmental concerns or environmental issues are addressed by PPRP. We've asked questions about it, but probably did not include my review of that in my testimony, perhaps. I don't recall. I don't see it right in front of me, but definitely asked questions about it.
But just to clarify, your answer is that your assessment of those factors it's not included in your direct testimony or your surrebuttal testimonies.
Are you asking if I've included a statement, or I'm not sure what you're asking?
Mr. Ray, I'm just asking if you've set forth an opinion as to the sufficiency of the information the company has provided as about how the Doubs-Goose Creek 500 kilovolt transmission line will help preserve environmental quality and greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals in Maryland.
I did not include that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Dean, any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay. Good afternoon, ma'am. I just had just one quick point I wanted to touch on. You were here when Mr. Hozempa testified, is that correct?
Yes.
And I asked him about the critical energy infrastructure, that he provided that definition in his rebuttal.
Correct.
And he essentially said it was a pretty broad definition, and essentially all PE transmission lines would be considered to be CEI. Do you agree with that statement?
They might have, the company may have their own definition of a critical energy infrastructure, but my understanding of it is the company indicated that the facilities are FERC classified critical energy infrastructure. And so all of our questions were whether the company provided sufficient information to demonstrate that FERC definition.
Okay, so does FERC say this line is CEI, but this one isn't, or is it just a definition and you have to argue that, yes, this meets, this line meets that definition.
That's my understanding. You would have to. It's a broad definition. It says, if if the destruction or unavailability of the line would cause, public safety concerns
National
and
security,
national security.
so it's, so kind of what the definition Mr. Hozempa provided, but they didn't provide information to you for, in your mind, to qualify it as CEI.
Correct.
But there's no organization that says, this is CEI, this is not CEI. Is it kind of up to the utility?
That's my understanding. It's a FERC definition, and my understanding of it is it's up to whoever classifies their facility as as a FERC identified facility to demonstrate that it meets the definition of that.
Okay. But based on what you saw in his rebuttal, do you believe it meets the definition, or it does not meet the definition in your mind?
It's possible that it meets the definition.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Glad we got to the bottom of that. All right, anybody have any questions based on mine?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Hold on, Mr. San Martino.
Yeah, I guess we have one more question, Your Honor.
All right. Put a bell on him. You know he's coming.
Ms. Deriri, if you recall, during Mr. Hozempa's questioning, he stated that essentially every piece of utility infrastructure is critical energy infrastructure. Do you agree with that? Is that also your professional opinion?
It's my opinion that a company may have their own designation of their infrastructure, but my understanding of a critical infrastructure, especially if you classify the facility as a FERC classified critical energy infrastructure, it would have to meet that definition.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
No further questions.
All right. Anybody else?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you very much, ma'am. Appreciate it. All right. Briefs, I assume?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Have you guys
Here.
talked about a briefing schedule, or?
No.
I believe there's one set forth in the
Oh, did
procedural
did,
order.
did we set one?
I
God,
Yeah.
it's been so long since I looked at that.
I can't recall. Let me pull it up.
Like, if I recall, I believe the deadline for initial briefs is February 10th.
Sounds reasonable. So I think I made the schedule.
Yeah, the consent schedule that, that was submitted, so initial briefs are due February 10th, and reply briefs are on the 2nd of March. And the proposed order target date would be the 31st of March, but I guarantee I'll get it out before then because I'm going away before then, so. All right, so do we have anything else? All right, thank you all very much, I appreciate it, and look forward to your briefs.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We're off the
Your Honor.
record.
All these clips.
I brought you.
I don't know where they came from. I must have had them.
Make sure you have enough clips.
I may have commandeered your